So in this course, we're going to use a variety of technologies. In particular, we're going to make use of two code writing tools, one called Eclipse and one called Replit.com. And depending on when you're watching this video, you've probably used one or maybe even both of them up to this point. But this video is going to explore how to get, in particular, Eclipse set up on your home computer. We're also going to be using one custom-made game engine for the class. Java typically is not an engine or not a language that we write video games in for a variety of reasons. So as such, there's not too many game engines that we can get set up on our school computers. So I had to write one for us to make sure that we could actually have a little bit of fun and really investigate what we're capable of. So ideally, students are going to work effectively in class, and there's going to be a little need for you to actually work at home. But just in case, life happens. We don't know what's going to happen. Maybe we get sent home for pandemic reasons. Maybe the school just switches to a virtual strategy. Or maybe you have to quarantine for some reason, or whatever the reasons are. You may be working at home for some reason. Maybe that's just because you need a little bit of extra time, or you're the type of person who's kind of a go-getter and you want to learn more because you're actually interested in it. And that's great. Regardless, we'd like everyone to install the tools at home, quite simply because, as I said, life basically happens and we never really know what to expect. Now, Replit.com is a cloud-based tool, and it is a tool that allows you to write your code almost in a very similar idea to like a Google Doc or something like that, where it's saved on somebody else's server, and then you can access that file from anywhere with an internet connection. You could access it from your phone, you could access it from a laptop, a desktop at school, whatever it is, you can access and edit and even test and run your code from anywhere. It does have one major drawback. It's slow depending on the number of people actively using the server at that moment. So in peak hours, like during the school day, it's actually pretty slow. But in the evenings, it's usually a lot better and much more tolerable. Now that being said, we are going to focus on this video on setting up the industry standard tool, which is called Eclipse. And this is really what we really want to dig into. Now, if you do want to use Replit, for some reason or whatever the reason is, and maybe you can't get Eclipse working on at home, all you need to do is go to Replit.com and click the login button at the top. Don't worry, the login basically works like it uses your GAPS account. So there's no security issues whatsoever. The website never sees any of your personal information. Google handles all that behind the scenes and just basically sends that website a token saying you are who you say you are, so they should let you in. And that's basically it. Google acts as like the doorman to a restaurant type thing. Anyways, now let's get into Eclipse because that's where things get a little bit more interesting. Now, as I said, Eclipse is an industry standard tool for Java. There's a lot of other ones out there like IntelliJ and things like that, but Eclipse is above and beyond the industry standard because it is so useful, so diverse, and so flexible in terms of what we can do in it. Now, I'm going to go through a number of steps, and I've written these steps up for you so you can actually access them. What you need to know is that these steps need to be followed in order, and you should not move on to the next step until you're done the current step, because if you do, you could break the whole thing, which means you have to fight your way through uninstalling everything, and that could be a problem. And then you eventually are going to have to restart. So take your time, do everything one step at a time. So let's take a look at this document so you can see what you need to do. So this is our Eclipse home setup. Now, part one. The first thing we need to do is download the software needed to actually do this. Now, you're going to need 3 pieces of software, really 2 pieces of software and a script. But let's take a look at this. So when you go on to your Google Classroom, you're going to go down to the Day 1 Introduction section, and you're going to see 2 options, Eclipse Home Setup for Windows and Eclipse Home Setup for Mac. So depending on what you're working on, you're going to want to click on the option related to you. The instructions are basically the same, but the files do change. So you do need to be very wary about what you're doing. So at this point, the commonality of this video is going to shift, and I'm going to go into one tour or the other while you're watching this video so you can see how to follow along. And on to Windows setup.
So first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to download the software that's expected for Windows. Now you can see in the instructions here that there's a Windows file name and a Mac file name for everything. We obviously want the Windows file name. And what you can see is that I've actually included two different versions of the software. Now I may have mentioned this before, but basically here's the reason. When you download this file and you try to download, this is the one we actually need. Now the problem is your security on your computer may be a little bit tighter than other people's, so it may actually deny you the ability to download this. That's fine. If that's the case, download the zip file version instead, and then just unzip it. And inside that unzipped folder, you will find the executable file. The same thing is for the Mac as well, because it runs into the same security issues. So we're going to go and grab these three files from our Google Classroom. So if you scroll to the top, there's our two choices, as we talked about before. We have our Windows and we have our Mac. Now we're going to go into the Windows one to make sure that we're grabbing the correct files. And what you can see here is that we have the executable and zip files for everything. So the first two files here are the JDK, and that's that first file that we're looking at, the JDK, Java Development Kit. Now I'm going to download the the executable version. I can see that that one's the compressed archive, so that's a zip file, compressed. That's what zip files do. So I'm going to download this guy. And it's just opening it up in a new window, which I can grab in a second. And now I also need Eclipse. And again, I want the executable file. So I'm going to download that guy. And then finally, the SLS formatting file. Everybody needs the exact same file, regardless of whether you're on Windows or Mac. So I'm going to download this one as well. So I open them all up in a new tab, so which means now I can just click the download. And when I click all the downloads, it's going to throw it into my downloads folder. Now I've already done this prior to this just to make sure that I have all the files and they're already ready to go. So what I'm going to show you is this is what they look like when you get them. For some reason, I downloaded the zip version of the JDK. So I'm going to unzip this one right here. Right click, extract all. If you don't see that, you can click on up here. I'm working on Windows 11. So if you're on Windows 10, you'll see the little extract option up here, and there'll be a button to unzip when you click on that extract. But on Windows 11, we just click extract all right here, or you just right click and say extract all, which is much easier. Just let that go. And there we go. So I'm not actually going to need this zip file anymore. So I'm actually going to delete it so there's no confusion of anything that we actually need. All right, so now we go back to our document. I can close these other directories now. I don't need any of these tabs. So we've finished the first part. We've got all three files. Moving on to the second part, actual setup. Now, it's actually a little bit more straightforward to set this stuff up on Windows than it is Mac, but that also may just be because I'm used to working on a Windows computer versus a Mac. Now, I'm hoping this works because I just uninstalled all this stuff off my computer just so I can make this video and everything looks clean. Now, the first thing you can do if you want to verify that you don't already have Java set up on your computer is you can open up your command line, basically your console. If you just hit your Windows key and type in CMD, it'll bring up your command prompt. And in here, you could type in Java-version. Now you can see I do not have a version of Java installed on here because I just uninstalled it a few seconds ago. If you have another version on there, it's not the end of the world. We can work around that. It's okay. And you might have another version on there for some other reason. Maybe you installed something at one point that automatically installed it. Maybe it's a relative's computer that you're working on, and maybe they're programmers and they have Java on there. Whatever the reason, you may have another version in there. Now, if you know that that version's not going to be used, you could uninstall it. Just Google how to uninstall Java on Windows, and you'll figure it out pretty quickly. It's fairly straightforward. It's just in your add and remove programs like everything else is. All right. So it says just run the executable file. So let's run the executable file. Where'd it go? And this is the JDK that we're running first. So I'm going to run that JDK. Now I want that 8 version 301. Yes, I do want it to go. Minimize this. Now I'm going to choose, as we can see here, it says click yes to run the file if it asks, then click next. Okay. Now the next piece, it says keep choosing all the default options. So I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to let everything go exactly where it is. Hit next. And it just makes life easier if you use the default options, unless for some reason you absolutely have to change. So this is telling me my destination folder. This is where it's going to actually install. Okay, so program files Java JRE 1.80 _ 31. Now I want to kind of keep note of this because I may need that later on. I've written it down here as well so you can see it. So just in case you forget it, I'm going to keep that option. That's just another default option. Click next. Now this part of the process may take a few seconds depending on the speed of your computer and how fast things are actually going to move along. Let's see how long this takes on my brand new computer. Go Java, go Java. Yay! So it says that it's complete and it's successfully installed. That is good news. So we can close this now. So it says it will install now. This may take some time depending on your computer. Keep the default installation directory. Write it down if necessary. Well, I wrote it down for you. So when it finishes, click close. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up that command prompt to show you that it installed. So again, we hit command, and I can type in Java-version. And now we can actually see that it appeared. It's there. We installed Java. But there's one extra step that we need to do to make sure that when we're building our programs, it can find this thing. So what we need to do is we need to set up a path environment variable. And it's pretty easy to do this. We're basically going to be setting up an environment path to this location, which is the same folder with the /bin at the end. That is our goal. So you can copy this if you'd like, because we're going to need that. Copy that. Now we need to get into the section to actually edit our environment variables on our computer. It's very straightforward to do. Just tap the Windows key. Again, I'm on Windows 11, but if you're on Windows 10 or whatever, it'll still work the same way. Just type environment. You see, I didn't even get all the way through the word and it already popped up. Edit the system environment variables. Yes, please. Now I want to click on this environment variables button. And down here in the system variables section, this is the one we care about. Not these ones, down here in the system variables section. So what I want to do is I want to edit this path. So I'm going to click this path and I'm going to hit edit. And you might see another version. See, you can see that I actually have this in here from my previous install. I'm going to delete this so you can see this fresh. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to click new, and I'm just going to paste in that location. Okay. And click away from it. The next thing I want to do is I want to push this thing all the way up to the top using move up. And what'll happen is it basically takes precedence over other things. And that's what we really want to happen. So that is making sure that it's always going to be referencing this development kit when we're building any of our stuff. Click OK, click OK, click OK. So there we go. And that's it. We now have the JDK installed. There's nothing else to it. That's going to be much more smooth than the Mac version. That one caused me a little bit of trouble in that video. Okay. So that is setting up our JDK. So we move on to the next piece of software, which is Eclipse. You can see this is much, much simpler. All we need to do is run that executable file. So let's go back to our folder. Go back up to where we had it. And there's my executable file for Eclipse. Now when I run this, hopefully magic happens and it works great. Now this one can sometimes take a little bit longer to do. So I want to choose the Eclipse IDE for Java developers. You can see there's a lot of options here, but we are going to stick with Eclipse IDE for Java developers. As I said, this is an industry standard tool for a lot of different things, and you can see it obviously can work with other languages as well. But we're working with it with Java. Now, do we want to create a start menu entry? Do we want to create a desktop shortcut? That's all completely up to you. I'm going to create a start menu entry. I don't really like having things on my desktop unless I absolutely have to. What you will notice here is that it's also going to be installing JRE 17. Wait a second. We just put all that effort into installing JDK 8. 17 is obviously a lot newer. So why don't we just use 17? Well, the reason why we don't use 17 is simple. The game engine that I built for you is built to work with the school computers. And the school computers, being in an education system, don't get updated very often. So they are still rocking JDK 8. So we are making all of our stuff right. But it's okay that this stuff is installed. It won't really hurt anything. As long as we follow the instructions that I have laid out below, you should be fine and everything should work exactly as we expect it to. So let's click install. Again, we're just going to leave the default everything the way we expect it. Hit install. Now this one may take a little bit longer because it's putting in a lot more files. The interesting thing about Eclipse is technically it doesn't actually install anything. Eclipse is just a group of files. It basically just creates a folder, and you're just running things from that folder. The older versions of Eclipse didn't even have an installation program. It just, here's a folder that's all zipped up, and you unzipped it, and it worked. And in fact, you could actually take this folder that it's installing to right now, throw it on a flash drive, and you'd be able to run Eclipse from your flash drive without a problem. The only problem is that you wouldn't have the JDK that we just installed, and that can be an issue. So that's it. Now I don't want to click launch yet. I'm actually going to close this without launching it, and I'll show you why in a second. So we're going to, let me minimize this. I'm going to hit close. It's going to say, no, you didn't launch it yet. I'm going to say, that's okay. Do I want to launch it now? No, I do not. The reason why I don't is because I need to set up a few things first. Okay. What I need to do is I need to set up a workspace. Now, workspaces are a fantastic thing that Eclipse uses specifically. A lot of IDEs don't do this, and I wish more did, to be honest. I wish Visual Studio did this as well. Basically, a workspace is kind of like a folder recognized by Eclipse. What that means is when you first open Eclipse, you can say, go to this workspace, which is really a folder. And what it does, it has all of the projects you've ever built and stored in that workspace, which means they're all basically open simultaneously. This allows you to jump back and forth between files. Maybe you want to copy a method here, put it into the other program there, and it makes it really easy to flow between your programs. Whereas if you're doing, say, standard Visual Studio for C++ or C#, every single time you open Visual Studio, it's a whole new project. And that can be pretty cumbersome. And it's, it does that for resourcing reasons and a number of other things. But having all this stuff at your fingertips because of this workspace is a great thing. The other benefit of having a workspace is that you can actually have different workspaces. And every single time you open Eclipse, you could say, I want to work in this workspace now, or I want to work in that workspace now. And the reason why this is good is I may have one for my personal stuff that I do on the side, and then I may have another one for school. That way they don't get mixed up, and I can keep things distinct and separate. So, how do we actually create a workspace? Well, all you're going to do is create a folder. Where do you create this folder? Well, ideally speaking, we want to be able to take our programs to and from home and school. So what that means is if you're working on a laptop, no problem. Just create a folder on your desktop, maybe called ICS2, and then inside of that, create one called workspace or something like that. I like to call my workspace actually workspace, just so I know. You might want to make it a little bit more specific. You might call it school workspace or home workspace or whatever you want, depending on what you're doing. So laptop, just do it right on the desktop. If you don't have a laptop and you're actually working on a desktop computer at home or something else, then what you want to do is you want to use a flash drive. And just create that ICS2 folder and your workspace folder inside of that. Now I'm working on my desktop computer right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a folder inside of that Eclipse setup one that I was just working on a second ago. So I'm going to create my new folder here, ICS2. And then inside of that, I'm going to create a folder called Workspace. Again, I could call it home workspace. I could call it whatever I want. It doesn't even have to have the word workspace in there. I'm just doing it because it's consistent with the naming scheme. So I've created the folder now. That's pretty much all there is to it. All we have to do now is open up Eclipse. But wait, where's my Eclipse? So you can't see my start bar right now, but it didn't actually come on my start bar. So what do I need to do is I need to find it. And we can see that it's not in here at the moment. So I'm going to search for Eclipse. There it is. I'm going to pin this guy to my taskbar, the thing that I have at the bottom of my screen that you can't see at this moment, but I'm also going to pin it to start. So now when I close this and reopen my thing, we can see that it's right there, my Eclipse. Now for your Windows start menu, yours is going to look a little bit different because you're probably using Windows 10 or earlier, and you have your icon in the bottom left, you pop it up, and the big window over here shows up. That's where that would go. But either way, you just need to make sure that you have access to your Eclipse, and once you've done that, just click the icon, or again, you could just come in here and type Eclipse, and just click the app. Whatever you're more comfortable with, they both work. So I'm going to open this up, Eclipse ID 2021-06, so you can see exactly when I set this up. The next thing it's looking for is, where is your workspace? Okay, two things here. First of all, we want to make sure this remains unchecked. Use this as the default and do not ask again. I want it to ask every single time. And the reason why is because I may want to point it to a different workspace next time I work. So I'm just going to leave that one unchecked. So now I got to browse to wherever I created that workspace. Hit the browse button, and I threw it on my desktop inside of my Eclipse setup folder, ICS2, workspace. And I just hit select folder. And there it is, and I click launch. Let this, it always takes a little bit of time the first time that you run Eclipse. That's okay, that should be expected. Now, going back into our instructions, we have now finished part 3. We still have 2 more parts to do. Okay? Part 4, set up code formatting. Now here's the thing. I want you to do this step in class as well. Even though Eclipse is already set up in class, I want you to do this step, because what this does is it sets up your code formatting, makes sure your brackets in there are in the correct space and things like that. So it basically does it for you automatically when you first create your project. If you don't, it can actually look pretty ugly. Now the instructions for this on Windows and Mac are basically the same. You just have to get into the right directory. So what we want to do is we want to get into this Windows Preferences Java code style / formatter location. So back to where my Eclipse was. Up here, my window, I want to click on, and there we go, window. Well, that should just be window, not Windows. There we go. Window, Preferences, and then I want to click on Java, and then code style, and then formatter. Now you can see that this is the default layout of the code. This is what Java would normally look like if we didn't include our formatter. It's short, it's concise, but it's also pretty ugly and difficult to read. The lack of symmetry really makes life challenging, and we want to get rid of that. We want to make our code symmetrical. Who cares if it's a little bit longer, because when we compile it, the length doesn't make a difference anyway. I'd rather have code that I can read. So what we're going to do is we are going to import that SLSS formatter file that we downloaded a minute ago. So click import, and then browse to wherever it is that you stored it on your stuff. I put it right in my Eclipse setup folder. There's my SLS formatting, and I'm going to open, and you can see immediately it's much different, much cleaner, much easier to read. So I'm going to leave that, and I'm going to hit apply, and now I can hit apply and close. So now my projects will automatically have that whenever I create a new project. Okay, one last step, final configuration. So in this piece, we got to do 2 small things. We got to make sure basically that every time we create a project, it's pointing to that JDK8, especially considering the fact that when we first installed it, it automatically installed the 17 version. So we got to make sure that it's doing the right stuff. So again, we're going to go into that Windows Preferences Java location, but this time under Installed JREs. Okay, Windows Preferences. Let's back this train up here. So there's Java, and we want to go into, not into Java, we want to go into Java Installed JREs, which is right here. There it is. So in this case, you can see that mine is the, let's see, is that the right one? That is only the 17 version. Now, if you're running Mac, it'll automatically show up. So this is actually not good right now. We need to add the proper location. So what we need to do is make sure that we're pointing to this location here. So I'm going to copy this just so I can find it. So it's not in the list. So we need to search for it and make sure we get to it. So we're going to browse to that location. So I'm going to search, and we can see, go back again, C program files Java. So we're going to go to my C drive. There's my C drive. I want to go into program files, not program files 86, just program files. And then Java. And you can see that I have 2 here. I have a JDK and a JRE. We want the JRE. We want this guy. Select folder. And we can see there it is, and this is the one I'm going to check. Okay? I don't think I can move the location or order what happens, but this is the one I want. So I'm going to click apply. Now, before we apply and close, notice that there's another option, one more last thing that we need to do. On the left menu, underneath Java, still here, I also want to go to this compiler option. This page contains unsaved. Yes, apply. So this compiler compliance level, this is basically looking at the wrong location. You can see when selecting 16 compliance, make sure to have a compliance JRE installed, activated, currently 1.8. We want to change this down to 1.8. And now we're going to hit apply again. All right, so just to make sure that everything went to the way we want it, there's our JRE. Everything is in here. I don't know why this is here twice, but it is for some reason, but it is. I don't know why that is. Oh, that set up the default. Awesome. When I hit apply, it automatically did that. That's great. So anyways, back to our, where'd it go? Compiler. Yes, compiler. It's still at 1.8. Now we can hit apply and close. So supposedly everything should be set up and everything should work the way we expect it now. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a starting project just to test this out. File, new, Java project. I'm going to call it whatever I want. You notice that it's being stored in the Java workspace. You know that it's automatically using Java 1.8. Yes. Java 1.8 is the JDK 8, just in case you're confused on that. 1.8, right? So the project name. So let's just call this first project, first program. Okay, and it automatically updates everything. All we have to do is click finish. It may take a couple seconds. And once it's here, I guess I don't really need this guy. Oh, it is already there. So there's our first program. The problem is it's pretty empty. There's no actual code files in Eclipse programs by default. I know in Replit it automatically creates all that stuff for us. Not in Eclipse. We have to do a little bit of work. So to get our first file in here, we're going to right click on here and we're going to say new class. Now I'm going to call this main program. This is going to be the name of my class. And since this is my first file, it needs that public static void main method, the main method that we see in all of our programs, in there. So I want to add that method stub. Everything else is going to be left alone. I just got to click finish now. And you can see our code is set up. It's got all the brackets in the correct location. We can just start writing our code. So let's try doing a simple hello world program. System.out.println hello world. And IntelliSense is doing its magic. It'll work every single time. It does all the color highlighting, everything like that. And now we just got to hit run. This little button right here. Run main program. Yes, so every time you hit run, if you haven't saved yet, it's going to ask you to save your stuff first, which you should do. Otherwise, it's going to be running old versions of the files. And we can see Hello World showed up down there. And that's it. We now officially have Eclipse and our JDK installed, and we're ready to work in standard Java programs. We're also ready to get integrating with our Java game engine, which is going to be coming up in another video after this one. Good luck and have fun.